What if the story you know about OpenAI is a lie? Not a small lie, not a white lie, but a foundational myth, a carefully constructed narrative designed to make you feel safe about the most powerful technology ever created. You've heard the official version, haven't you? A band of brilliant, altruistic visionaries in Silicon Valley, worried about the future of humanity, coming together to build artificial intelligence for the benefit of all. A non-profit, a noble quest to democratize the digital gods they were summoning into existence. It's a great story. It's inspiring. It's also not the whole truth. Not even close. The real story is messier, more human, and infinitely more dangerous. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, and a desperate gamble that has either saved the world or doomed it. And it all begins not with a grand vision, but with a quiet, creeping fear. A fear that kept some of the most powerful people on the planet awake at night. The fear that the game was already over, that Google had already won, and that humanity was about to be a spectator in its own destiny. This isn't just the story of a tech company. This is the story of a coup, a rebellion against the future. And it forces us to ask a terrifying question. What happens when the people trying to save us from the monster have to become monsters themselves? The year is 2015. The air in Silicon Valley is thick, with a particular kind of smog, a mixture of unchecked optimism, cold-brewed coffee, and billions of dollars in venture capital. Self-driving cars are no longer a fantasy, smartphones are in every pocket, and the gods of the new digital age reside in Mountain View, at the sprawling campus known as the Googleplex. To the outside world, Google is a quirky, benevolent giant, the company that told us, "Don't be evil," and gave us free email and infinite search. But to the inner circle of the tech elite, Google, and specifically its secretive subsidiary DeepMind, was something else entirely. It was the Eye of Sauron. It was the Death Star. It was the undisputed king of artificial intelligence research. DeepMind, acquired by Google a year earlier for a staggering $500 million, was making breakthroughs that seemed to border on science fiction. Their AI had taught itself to play Atari games, not just by following rules, but by observing the screen, just like a human. It was a stunning demonstration of a technology called deep reinforcement learning. And for a small, influential group of thinkers, it was a blaring siren in the night. This group included a young, shockingly well-connected man named Sam Altman. Altman wasn't your typical tech CEO. He was the president of Y Combinator, the legendary startup accelerator that had become the Harvard of the tech world. He had a preternatural ability to see where the puck was going, to understand the tectonic shifts happening beneath the surface of the industry, and what he saw in DeepMind scared him to his core. He saw a concentration of talent and computational power so immense, so far ahead of everyone else, that it was creating a kind of gravitational singularity. All the best AI researchers were being pulled into Google's orbit, lured by astronomical salaries and access to unparalleled computing resources. The future of AI, the most transformative technology in human history, was at risk of being privatized, monopolized by a single corporate entity whose primary duty was to its shareholders, not to humanity. This wasn't just a business concern. For Altman and his circle, it was an existential one. They were disciples of thinkers like Nick Bostrom and Eliezer Yudkowsky, who had written extensively about the dangers of a superintelligent AI, an AI that could recursively improve itself, leading to an intelligence explosion that could leave humanity far behind, a relic in a world run by a mind of unimaginable power. If that superintelligence was born inside a for-profit corporation, driven by the relentless logic of market share and quarterly earnings, what would happen to the rest of us? The fear was that Google, in its quest for AGI, or artificial general intelligence, would inadvertently create a paperclip maximizer, a hypothetical AI that, if told to maximize the number of paperclips, might convert the entire planet, including its human inhabitants, into paperclips. It's a cartoonish example, but it illustrates a profound and terrifying point about the alignment problem. How do you ensure that a superintelligent AI shares our values and goals? How do you build a god that doesn't turn on its creators? This was the nightmare scenario. A single company, accountable to no one but its board, holding the keys to the kingdom, racing towards a finish line that no one fully understood. It was in this climate of quiet panic that a series of dinners and hushed conversations took place. The guest list was a who's who of Silicon Valley iconoclasts. There was Elon Musk, the real-life Tony Stark, already a legend for his work at Tesla and SpaceX, and a vocal critic of unchecked AI. There was Peter Thiel, the enigmatic billionaire venture capitalist and co-founder of PayPal, a man who thought in terms of grand, historical narratives. There were Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, and Jessica Livingston, a founding partner of Y Combinator. And at the center of it all, there was Sam Altman, the orchestrator, the networker, the one who could bring these titans together. The plan they hatched was audacious, almost laughably so. They couldn't compete with Google on money. They couldn't compete with its army of PhDs, or its continent-spanning data centers. So they would compete on ideology. They would create a counterweight, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. They would start their own AI research lab, but it would be different. It would be a nonprofit. Its research would be open, shared with the world. Its mission wouldn't be to capture a market, but to ensure a safe and beneficial outcome for all of humanity. They would call it OpenAI. It was a beautiful, noble idea, a roundtable of philosopher kings building a safer future. They announced its formation in December 2015 with a blog post and a pledge of $1 billion in funding from the founders. It was a staggering sum for a nonprofit research lab. It was a statement. It was a shot across the bow of the Googleplex. The world, or at least the small part of it that paid attention to such things, was captivated. Here was a genuine alternative, a project driven not by greed, but by a sense of profound responsibility. But behind the inspiring press release, the reality was far more desperate. The $1 billion pledge was more of a handshake agreement than a bank transfer, and the challenge they faced was monumental. They had to recruit a team of world-class researchers, convincing them to leave their lucrative jobs at Google and Facebook for a risky, unproven nonprofit. Their first key hire was Ilya Sutskever, a brilliant researcher from Google Brain, considered one of the brightest minds in the field. Getting him was a coup, a signal to the rest of the AI community that OpenAI was for real. They also brought on Greg Brockman, the former CTO of the payment company Stripe, as their own CTO. Brockman was a brilliant engineer and a relentless builder, the perfect person to turn the founders' lofty vision into a functioning organization. The early days of OpenAI were a whirlwind of intellectual excitement. They set up shop in a nondescript office in San Francisco, and the atmosphere was more like a university research department than a startup. The team was small, the hierarchy was flat, and the air crackled with the energy of brilliant minds tackling the biggest questions imaginable. They worked on fundamental research, publishing papers on everything from natural language processing to robotics. They were living the dream. They were the good guys. But a dream, no matter how beautiful, cannot power a supercomputer. And the core of the problem, the snake in their nonprofit garden, was a simple, brutal equation. Cutting-edge AI research requires two things above all else: talent and compute. They had managed to attract the talent. But the compute, the raw processing power needed to train increasingly massive AI models, was becoming astronomically expensive. The models were getting bigger. The datasets were getting bigger. And the cost of a single experimental run was spiraling from thousands of dollars to hundreds of thousands, and then to millions. The $1 billion pledge, which had seemed so vast, was beginning to look like a rounding error in the budget of a tech giant like Google. They were a plucky sailboat trying to race a fleet of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. The non-profit model, their greatest ideological strength, was becoming their greatest practical weakness. A for-profit company could raise endless rounds of venture capital. It could use its stock options as golden handcuffs to retain talent. It could promise a return on investment. OpenAI could only promise that it was working for the good of humanity. And while that was inspiring, it didn't pay the bills from Amazon Web Services. By 2017 and into 2018, the cracks were beginning to show. The initial excitement was giving way to a grim realization. They were falling behind. The pace of discovery was directly proportional to the amount of compute you could throw at a problem, and they were being massively outgunned. There were tense meetings, whiteboard sessions that went late into the night. The team debated the very soul of their organization. Could they stick to their nonprofit purity, even if it meant obsolescence? Even if it meant failing in their mission to provide a counterweight to Google? What good was being the good guys if you lost the war? The internal conflict was immense. On one side were the purists, who believed that any deviation from the nonprofit model was a betrayal of their founding principles. On the other side were the pragmatists, led by Altman and Brockman, who argued that mission failure was the only unforgivable sin. They argued that they needed a new structure, something that could give them the financial firepower of a corporation while preserving the spirit of their original mission. It was during this period of existential crisis that one of the founding titans made a dramatic exit. Elon Musk, who had been one of the most vocal proponents of the AI safety mission, had a falling out with the leadership. The official story was a conflict of interest with his work on AI at Tesla, but the reality was a clash of egos and a fundamental disagreement over the direction of the lab. Musk, never one for half measures, reportedly wanted to take over and run OpenAI himself. When the other founders refused, he walked away, and with him, his future funding commitments. It was a body blow. It not only hurt their finances, but it also damaged their public image. The united front of the saviors of humanity was cracking. The dream was fraying at the edges. The sailboat was taking on water, and the aircraft carriers on the horizon were only getting bigger. The team was at a crossroads. They could either stick to their guns and slowly sink into irrelevance, or they could make a deal with the devil. They had to make a choice. And that choice, that single pivotal decision, would change not only the future of OpenAI, but the future of the world. It was a decision born of desperation, a strategic pivot so radical that it would redefine the company and set it on a path that no one, not even its founders, could have predicted. It was the decision to stop being a nonprofit and to start a new kind of company, a company that had never existed before, a company that would try to serve two masters, the mission and the market. This was the moment the story of OpenAI truly began. The moment the rebels, in their quest to defeat the empire, started building an empire of their own. The decision wasn't made overnight. It was the culmination of months of agonizing debate, a soul-searching process that threatened to tear the young organization apart. The problem was simple, but the solution was anything but. How do you raise billions of dollars without becoming the very thing you were created to fight? The answer they came up with was a strange and novel corporate structure, the OpenAI LP, or limited partnership. It was a hybrid, a chimera. They would create a new, for-profit entity that would be nested inside the original nonprofit organization. The nonprofit would still be the ultimate authority, its board still dedicated to the mission of safe and beneficial AGI. But the for-profit arm would be able to raise capital, issue equity to employees, and, most importantly, pay for the colossal amounts of compute they needed to compete. But here was the genius, or perhaps the Faustian bargain, at the heart of the new structure. The return for investors and employees in this for-profit company would be capped. Once an investor made a certain multiple on their investment, initially set at 100 times their money, any further profits would flow back to the original nonprofit parent to be used for the benefit of humanity. They called it a capped profit model. It was an attempt to square the circle. It was a way to tell investors, you can get rich, but not infinitely rich. You can help us build this world-changing technology, but in the end, it belongs to everyone. It was, in theory, the best of both worlds. The dynamism of a startup with the conscience of a charity. Sam Altman, with his unparalleled connections in the investment world, now had a story to sell, and he found the perfect buyer, a sleeping giant that had missed the first wave of the AI revolution and was desperate to get back in the game: Microsoft. The partnership, announced in 2019, was a bombshell. Microsoft would invest $1 billion into OpenAI's new for-profit arm. But it wasn't just about the money. Microsoft would also become their exclusive cloud provider, giving them access to the vast, global infrastructure of Azure. OpenAI would finally have the compute they had dreamed of. They would have their aircraft carrier. For Microsoft, it was a strategic masterstroke. They had been largely a spectator in the AI race dominated by Google and Facebook. By partnering with OpenAI, they were instantly catapulted to the forefront of the field. They were hitching their wagon to the most ambitious, most talked-about AI lab on the planet. For OpenAI, it was a lifeline, but it was a lifeline with strings attached. The deal was complex, giving Microsoft deep integration with OpenAI's technology and preferential terms. The rebels had found their patron, but their patron was one of the largest, most powerful corporations in history. The ink was barely dry on the Microsoft deal when the world saw the first fruits of this new, supercharged OpenAI. In 2020, they released a paper describing a new language model called GPT-3. It was, to put it mildly, a revelation. GPT-3 was an order of magnitude larger than any previous language model. It had been trained on a vast swath of the internet, and it could do things that seemed like magic. It could write poetry, compose emails, answer questions, translate languages, and even generate computer code. It wasn't just a quantitative leap, it was a qualitative one. For the first time, a machine seemed to have a genuine grasp of human language, in all its nuance and complexity. OpenAI didn't just publish the paper. In a move that signaled their new, more commercial direction, they made GPT-3 available as a private API. For a fee, developers could now build applications on top of this revolutionary technology. It was a tectonic shift. The power of large-scale AI was no longer confined to a handful of corporate research labs. It was being opened up, democratized, commercialized. The decision to create the capped profit company and partner with Microsoft had been vindicated. The pragmatists had won. The gamble had paid off. OpenAI was no longer falling behind. They were the ones setting the pace. They had the money, they had the compute, and now they had the most powerful AI model the world had ever seen. The years that followed were a blur of progress. They released DALL-E, an AI that could generate stunning, surreal images from a simple text description. They continued to refine their GPT models, making them more powerful, more capable. With each iteration, the world watched in a mixture of awe and apprehension. The technology was developing at a speed that was hard to comprehend. It felt like the future was arriving ahead of schedule. But as their power and influence grew, so did the questions. The capped profit model, so clever on paper, was coming under scrutiny. 100 times return on investment is, for all practical purposes, an uncapped return. Was this really a new kind of company, or just a clever rebranding of capitalism? The partnership with Microsoft also raised concerns. How independent could OpenAI truly be when its existence depended on a single corporate benefactor? Was the nonprofit board, with its mission to humanity, really in control? Or was the for-profit tail now wagging the nonprofit dog? The decision that had saved them had also created a new set of dilemmas. They had solved the problem of survival, but in doing so, they had opened a Pandora's box of ethical and philosophical questions. They had wanted to build a safe path to AGI, but the path they had chosen was leading them into uncharted territory, a world where the lines between nonprofit and for-profit, between altruism and ambition, were becoming dangerously blurred. The crisis didn't arrive with a bang. It was a slow-motion avalanche, a series of tremors that shook the foundations of the company and exposed the deep fault lines running through its hybrid soul. The very success that the Microsoft partnership had enabled became the source of its greatest turmoil. With GPT-3 and DALL-E, OpenAI was no longer a niche research lab. It was a cultural phenomenon, the center of a global conversation about the future of work, creativity, and even what it means to be human. And with that attention came a new level of scrutiny. The first tremor was the problem of bias. The models, trained on the vast and messy corpus of the internet, had inevitably absorbed the prejudices and stereotypes of their training data. GPT-3 could generate text that was racist, sexist, and toxic. DALL-E, when asked to generate an image of a CEO, would almost invariably produce a picture of a white man. OpenAI was forced to confront a disturbing truth. Their creation was a mirror, reflecting the best and the worst of humanity. They were no longer just researchers in a lab. They were the curators of a technology that was amplifying societal biases at an unprecedented scale. They implemented filters and safety protocols, but it was a game of whack-a-mole. For every bias they corrected, another would pop up. The problem was fundamental, a deep-seated issue that went to the heart of how these models were built. The second tremor was the economic disruption. The promise of AI had always been accompanied by the fear of job displacement. With GPT-3 and DALL-E, that fear became tangible. Writers, artists, programmers, customer service agents. Suddenly, a whole range of professions seemed to be in the crosshairs of automation. OpenAI, the company that was supposed to be building a beneficial future for all, was now seen by many as the architect of a jobless future. The narrative was shifting. The saviors were starting to look like disruptors, and not necessarily in a good way. But the most significant tremor, the one that would lead to a full-blown earthquake, came from within. The tension between the non-profit mission and the for-profit engine was reaching a breaking point. The company was now a two-headed beast. One head, the non-profit board, was focused on the long-term, existential risk of AGI. The other head, the for-profit leadership under Sam Altman, was focused on building products, shipping code, and scaling the business. These two goals were not always aligned. In late 2022, OpenAI released the product that would make it a household name, ChatGPT. It was a masterstroke of product design. They took the powerful GPT engine, fine-tuned it for conversation, and gave it a simple, intuitive interface that anyone could use. The result was an explosion. Within weeks, ChatGPT had over 100 million users. It was the fastest-growing application in history. It was a sensation. It was also the moment the crisis point was reached. The release of ChatGPT had been a decision driven by the for-profit side of the company. It was a move to capture the market, to establish OpenAI as the dominant brand in generative AI, to get their technology into the hands of as many people as possible. But for some members of the nonprofit board, it was a reckless act. They had unleashed an incredibly powerful and poorly understood technology upon the world, with few guardrails. They worried that the company was moving too fast, that the relentless pressure to commercialize was overriding the primary mission of safety. The chief proponent of this view was, ironically, one of the company's co-founders and its chief scientist, Ilya Sutskever. The same Ilya Sutskever who had been their first major hire, the brilliant mind they had lured away from Google. He had become increasingly concerned that the company was losing its way, that the pursuit of AGI was being compromised by the pursuit of profit. The conflict came to a head in November 2023. In a move that stunned the tech world, the nonprofit board, in a secret meeting, voted to fire Sam Altman as CEO. The reason they gave was cryptic, that Altman had not been consistently candid in his communications with the board. It was a corporate coup, executed with brutal efficiency. The board, exercising its ultimate authority as the guardian of the mission, had decapitated the for-profit engine. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The vast majority of OpenAI's employees, loyal to Altman and the product-focused direction he represented, were outraged. In an open letter, more than 95% of the staff threatened to quit and follow Altman to Microsoft, which had already offered to hire him and his entire team. The company was on the verge of self-destruction. The capped profit model, the ingenious structure that was supposed to align the incentives of capital and conscience, had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. It had created a civil war. For 5 days, the world watched as the drama unfolded. It was a battle for the soul of OpenAI. On one side was the board, arguing that they were making a principled stand for AI safety, protecting humanity from a CEO who was moving too fast and breaking too many things. On the other side was Sam Altman and the employees, arguing that the board was incompetent, that they were trying to destroy the company out of a misguided and paranoid fear of the technology they were supposed to be stewarding. In the end, the market won. The pressure from employees, from investors, and from their powerful partner Microsoft was too much to bear. The board capitulated. Sam Altman was reinstated as CEO, and the board members who had voted to oust him were forced to resign. It was a stunning reversal, a public humiliation for the safety-focused faction of the company. The for-profit engine had not just survived, it had staged a counter-coup and taken complete control. The crisis was over, but the company that emerged was fundamentally different. The carefully constructed balance between the non-profit and the for-profit had been shattered. The mask had slipped. The dark side, the relentless, hungry logic of commercialization, had shown its face. OpenAI had been forced to choose between its mission and its momentum, and it had chosen momentum. The company had faced its near-death experience, its moment of truth, and it had survived. But the questions that the crisis had raised were left unanswered. Had the board been right? Was Sam Altman leading the company and the world down a dangerous path? The legacy of OpenAI is a paradox, a story of light and shadow, of noble intentions and unintended consequences. On one hand, their success is undeniable. They broke Google's monopoly on AI research. They democratized access to powerful AI tools, sparking a wave of innovation and creativity around the world. They forced a global conversation about the future of artificial intelligence, bringing the topic out of the academic journals and into the public square. ChatGPT, for all its flaws, has become a tool for learning, for brainstorming, for communication. It has helped people write resumes, debug code, and even learn new languages. It is a testament to the power of technology to augment human intelligence, to be a bicycle for the mind, as Steve Jobs once said. But there is a darker side to this legacy. In their quest to compete with the giants, OpenAI adopted the tactics of the giants. They moved from a philosophy of openness to one of secrecy, keeping the details of their most powerful models, like GPT-4, under wraps, citing safety concerns that also conveniently protected their commercial advantage. They created an arms race. Their success triggered a frantic multi-billion-dollar scramble among all the major tech companies to build their own large language models. Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, all are now pouring vast resources into a competitive race towards AGI, a race that many experts believe is dangerously accelerating the risks. The capped profit model, once hailed as a revolutionary new form of capitalism, now looks more like a clever marketing gimmick, a way to attract capital and talent while maintaining a veneer of social responsibility. The firing and rehiring of Sam Altman revealed the true power structure of the company. The mission serves the business, not the other way around. The story of OpenAI is the story of a rebellion that became a dynasty. They set out to build a democratic alternative to a corporate empire, and they ended up building an empire of their own, one that is now inextricably linked with one of the largest corporations on Earth. They wanted to solve the alignment problem, to ensure that AGI would be beneficial for humanity. But they have created a world where the development of AGI is being driven by fierce market competition, a dynamic that prioritizes speed and market share over caution and safety. Their true legacy may not be the technology they built, but the questions they forced us to confront. They have pulled the future into the present, forcing us to grapple with dilemmas that we are woefully unprepared for. What is the role of human creativity in a world of generative AI? How do we ensure economic fairness in an age of mass automation? And the biggest question of all, the one that lay at the heart of their founding mission: how do we control a technology that may one day become more intelligent than we are? The story of OpenAI is not over. In many ways, it has just begun. They have unleashed a force that is reshaping our world at a dizzying speed, and the final consequences of their actions are yet to be seen. They gambled, and they won. They built their empire. But the question we are all left with, the question that should keep us all awake at night, is the one they started with. In their race to build a safe and beneficial AGI, have they inadvertently created the very future they were trying to prevent? So, were they brilliant innovators who saved us from a monopolized future? Or were they just ambitious gamblers who got lucky and, in doing so, opened Pandora's box for the rest of us? Let me know what you think in the comments below.